I'll go first, shall I? My name is Jon Hargreaves. I'm one of the conductors of the Nevis Ensemble. I also conduct the South Birmingham Sinfonia, the London Medical Orchestra, and the Octandra Ensemble in London, which is a contemporary music group.
I'm his wife, and also the co-director of the Nevis Ensemble, Holly Mathieson, and I do guest work. I work with Scottish Ballet. I used to work for Royal Scottish National Orchestra as their assistant conductor. NIOS as their resident conductor for the wee junior orchestra, the wee bubs. Yeah, so we've picked some scores out.
First one I chose is this Veni Veni Emmanuel by James MacMillan. And this score, well, I mean, one, it's a beautiful object, okay? I mean, I'm always a big fan. I guess it's that, someone once told me, I think it was like a novello thing of composers in sort of the 90s, they're all the novello scores are handwritten, you know. But it's beautiful, look at this. And I remember as an undergraduate, actually, if you look, every individual note has a stem of, you know, a given length. Look, you can see that they're kind of beautifully measured. It's so meticulous, and but the piece is just, as you know, I mean, it's really quite well known now, and I guess it certainly was by the time I was a student. But it's just such a fantastic piece. It takes the Veni Veni Emmanuel chant, Veni Veni Emmanuel, and fragments it and uses it as various, you know, little rhythmic cells and converts it, and it comes throughout the texture. There's a particular part actually where the cellos they start to play on and off the beat, and it's just so compelling. And then there's, yeah, I don't know, it's a piece I was so excited about at the age of around about, 18 to my current age, which I won't disclose, but it's really, really compelling music, and it's fantastic. And it's just great to see a handwritten score. I don't know if it's actually Sir James's hand. I'm not an expert on these things, but either way, you really do feel connected with it because of the handwrittenness of it, and the premiere, it says here, was given by Evelyn Glennie.
Yeah, and Scottish Chamber Orchestra.
Ah, okay, Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which I think leads on to.
Yeah, so this is a percussion concerto, and funnily enough, my first score is a percussion concerto as well by a Scottish composer, John McLeod, for Evelyn Glennie, Dame Evelyn Glennie. Which I'm not going to profess to be an expert in at all, actually, but it's in 3 movements and was written in 1987, but I've picked it because I was present in the room and sort of unofficially assisting when he recorded it last year with Dame Evelyn Glennie and the RSNO. So the album, which came out, I think, 6 months ago or a few months ago, it was really, really special to watch this powerhouse of Scottish composers and this extraordinary human being that is Dame Evelyn Glennie recording a piece that was written for her. And again, it's in his own hand, which I now know quite well because I've learnt a lot of his scores. I conducted one of the pieces on that recording. Again, beautiful, precise, angular. It's a lovely piece to look at. But it was gorgeous watching the recording process between the two of them as well, because a lot of it has to be... it's so noisy. She was surrounded by plastic
baffles
so that she could see but have a little bit of well, first of all, keep her noise from everyone else because they would have been deafened, but also keep her so she could really concentrate on what she was doing. It's unbelievably difficult solo part, but a beautiful piece, and it was just extraordinary seeing such a piece coming together in a recording studio. I think a percussion concerto has quite unique challenges as a conductor, because particularly with untuned percussion, how do you think about lyricism and rubato, if there is any, when it's not connected to melodic line, when it's purely rhythmic stuff that's being stretched like chewing gum. It's quite a different thing to listen for as a conductor, to anticipate how to accompany that.
The idea of percussion's like that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You have to make the illusion of continuity, despite actually the whole thing is very discontinuous, because you have it's inherently
on or
discontinuous. So
it's
how do you bring that about? As a conductor, I mean, as a player, really that's the trick, isn't it, to some extent?
Yeah.
It talks about aleatoric sections. Do you remember them recording that?
Nope. Oh, yes, I do actually.
How did that happen?
Stop asking me hard questions. Right, so the end of some of the movements, it's just to put the double hands down and let the orchestral instruments do their thing, and they took quite a few takes of it to get different versions of it, different permutations of how that could all work, and so it was quite an exploratory kind of process, rather than right, it needs to sound like this and then we know we've got a take. It was more, well, let's take a few and see what works best in the end. So my next one is Anton Bruckner, Vier kleine Orchesterstücke. And I picked this out not because I know it, I've never heard them, but it strikes me as really interesting to know how Anton Bruckner would write an orchestral miniature, because I think of his choral pieces as beautiful miniatures. They're often really succinct in what they want to say, and so there's just no extraneous material. But when I think about his orchestral pieces, it's like tectonic plates shifting at the rate of millennia. It's gargantuan in time scale, not just in terms of how long it takes to play one of his symphonies, for instance, but the rate at which any process within it happens. So the cadential processes will take 8 minutes or something, it's huge. So to then, which I think is why he's such a hard composer to listen to for a lot of people, you have to go a little bit zen to get it. Which is why I find the idea of 4 tiny little 4 or 5 page pieces really fascinating. I'd love to know. Look at that one, only 3 pages of full score. 5 systems, that's all.
That's a small orchestra.
I'd be absolutely fascinated. I know we could do this with Nevis.
Yeah.
It's got too many trombones, but only in some of the movements, actually.
Double winds, 2 horns.
Look, that's the Nevis repertoire sorted for next year. But looking at it, it is incredibly, it's small, it's just like a Mozart-sized orchestra, but it's really dense in terms of all of the material going on, the way he weaves it all together. It's obviously crammed with thematic ideas and working through, and even by the looks of it, within these short spans of time, fairly interesting harmonic progression and divergence, if you know what I mean. It's not just a little essay on G major. There's enough going on there to show that he really does take you on a harmonic journey and bring you back again.
Colin Matthews, Pluto the Renewer, this is the 8th planet, in addition for performance for a large orchestra, for performance with Holst's The Planets. Obviously, I think at the time it was it's 100 years, isn't it? Just recently, since the Planets was, I think, first performed. I think it had been composed for a while, actually. So I confess, I've not actually heard this, and I've never looked at the score before. So this is kind of, untrodden snow as far as I'm concerned. But I chose it because I'm just really interested in this idea of adding to a suite that's already, you know, and absolutely rightly, you know, I mean, there's another planet since Holst wrote the original suite, and so I'm kind of quite interested to see that, and you know, how has Colin Matthews taken this challenge on, and you know, what's he chosen to, what's the effect? He says, when he was asked by Kent Nagano to add to the planets, he had mixed feelings. To begin with, the planets is a very satisfying whole and one which makes perfect musical sense. Neptune ends the work in a way which is wholly appropriate for Holst, an enigmatic composer always likely to avoid the grand gesture if he could do something unpredictable instead. How could I begin again after music has faded completely away into outer space? And even though Pluto was discovered 4 years before Holst's death in 1934, I'm certain that he'd never once thought to write an additional movement. Interesting. So it is quite nerve-wracking, even for someone at kind of Colin Matthews' stature.
I like this. The last sentence is, Pluto, the renewer, is dedicated to the memory of Holst's daughter Imogen, with whom I worked for many years until her death in 1984, and who I suspect would have been both amused and dismayed by this venture. That's so lovely.
Well, the first thing that happens, look, is that the two back desks of the second violins hold the note at the end of Neptune. It's actually tied into the movement. It's the first thing you can see there.
A recurring sort of modal element of Holst the Planets is the whole tone scale, and the first melodic material he brings in here is entirely chromatic, so completely decimating one of the signatures of, or you know, fracturing it into half again.
Well, I don't know, but I think they're they're kind of whole tone related. Look. What you can't help but think is all of these little bits, especially the renewer, are these little bits coming back from other parts of the planets, you know, because that's one thing as a composer, I guess you'd be thinking is, okay, I have to respond to, as Colin Matthews says, to this musical whole, so what am I going to do here, you know, and it's obviously got to be in keeping with it. At the same time, obviously there needs to be a sense of kind of invention. But, I mean, for example, I had a quick look before we put the camera on, and you know, it's in 5/4, which is obviously a big planet's, you know, Mars being in 5/4, and there are actually later on in the piece some sort of rhythmic, you know, there's a sort of similar da 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 in the brass marked triple F. So that's obviously, you know, some kind of mode of connection between them two. And as you say, here's this kind of whole tone type harmony. Lots of tritones here in the basses. It's certainly something I think is interesting to do. Look at how would this, you know, how do you answer a challenge like write another planet? Right?
Right, my next one, I'm going to do 2 piano pieces. First of all is the Fairy Tale by Mettner, which my grandma used to play. And whenever I was staying at her house, I would sleep on the sun porch, which was just through the wall from the music room, and she would play the piano as I was falling asleep, often Mettner. And this actually isn't the one I was looking for. Was, I think it's called Sonata Reminiscenza, but it was we had a recording of her playing it as I walked down the aisle when we got married. So it's very special on 2 counts, Mettner's piano music. And along with that, another personal one, Piano 4 Hands. This is a piece by Satie called Trois Morceaux, in 3 pieces in the shape of a pear, which I think is brilliant. I don't know the piece at all, but for the first 3 or 4 years of our relationship, we did a lot of living in Airbnbs, shifting house every month, being semi-homeless, and whenever we made our way back to John's parents' place, the first thing we would do, without speaking a word, is go straight to the grand piano and play duets. So I do like coming across nice, interesting, and not too difficult
Yes.
little duets that we can play together, because it's such a nice thing to do
We
as
played
part
those,
of our courtship.
yeah, we played those, was it 6 pieces? Is it 6 easy, probably 6 easy pieces for a piano duet by Stravinsky.
Simplified even further, probably. Single fingers.
Which are really nice, actually.
Yeah, it's great.
Lovely.
I think that's the piece that when he was studying with Debussy said your music needs more form. So you can wrote this piece in the
Right.
form of a pair.
Oh,
I see. Oh, I like that. That's nice. So it's basically him doing the finger to Debussy. That
It's like
makes
the
it even
most sassy
better.
thing you can
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Great. Okay, here's one for me. George Crumb, an idol for the misbegotten. To be honest, it's more sort of George Crumb that I'm interested in. As part of my doctorate, I wrote about a string quartet of his, Black Angels, which is really amazing piece, absolutely fantastic sounds in it, and it's just fascinating. And it's always fascinating to look at George Crumb's scores because of the sheer. I mean, he was composing in the the heyday, I guess, was the 60s, in California, I think, at least kind of at a very kind of liberal area of the States, and it just, I mean, and it would always lots of kind of, exciting new ideas. In the case of Black Angels, it's actually the front of the score. It says for electric string quartet. Basically, the string quartet is amplified. And my professor, or one of my professors at York, where I studied, said, Jon, the thing about this piece, and I was at the premiere, it was really loud. That was the thing. It was really loud, and we're talking about the kind of loud that was, as I understand it, was really kind of Jimi Hendrix type loud. Not just sort of like loud for a kind of a string quartet recital, but actually, really loud. And that's kind of really interesting. If you listen to the start of Black Angels, then it's, just imagine it as a kind of a rock concert volume. It's really something. So Black Angels, there are the players. I think the cellist plays a gong. They play a glass harmonica at one point. There's a solo cello, and the other 3 players play wine glasses filled with water. That really lovely pure sound you get from them. They all speak different languages. Typically, they say numbers 1 through to I think 13 in languages from all over the world. Japanese, German, French. I don't think in English, actually, interestingly. But I like that idea because it means that, I mean, Swahili is one of the languages. I doubt there are that many people who speak, all of those languages and Swahili sort of thing. So the piece sort of makes more or less sense, or it sounds different to everyone. I quite like that idea of of different readings of the same piece. An idol for the for the misbegotten. I feel that misbegotten well describes the fateful and melancholy predicament of the species Homo sapiens at the present moment in time. Mankind has become ever more illegitimate in the natural world of plants and animals. Okay. The ancient sense of brotherhood with all life forms has gradually and relentlessly eroded, and consequently find ourselves monarchs of a dying world. We share the fervent hope that humankind will embrace anew nature's moral imperative. One thing that's really interesting, I think fascinating really, is it's actually handwritten. They're all handwritten scores, believe it or not.
Is it?
It doesn't look like it, does it? But see, the Black Angels had the same effect when I opened that. It's this amazingly neat calligraphy. But no, these are surely printed. Anyway, and there are all these things where he invites performers, so this marking for the horn, for example, Pipi semplice brackets like a primitive instrument. Often he'll talk to players about this is how I want you to play, and give them that sort of thing to interpret, which I find interesting. The players, by the way, are around the edges of a square. If that's the horn, then that's percussion 3, that's percussion 1, that's percussion 2, so they're in a sort of a diamond shape, I guess. So there's definitely a kind of a spatial element to all of this. Look, the percussion starts with, there's a kind of a horn rhapsody over the top, and the percussion starts with just a trill, and every now and again it will flare up. I wonder if that's going to get passed around. No, so in between there are little interjections, look, by the other percussionists, which obviously must have some sort of spatial effect around this diamond. It's a double stop, look, singing and playing for the horn there. Oh, look, a lion's roar. One of the percussionists, Percussion 2, plays a lion's roar. This is, I don't know if you know what, for those who may not know what a lion's roar, I mean, it's not the most common of instruments. It's like a drum with a rope, and the skin of the drum has a kind of a rope through it, and you pull the rope through the skin of the drum, and it goes kind of roar, which is really quite striking. Yeah.
Good pun.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah.
So my last score is not a score. It's a book that I found on these wonderful shelves, and it's called Joseph Haydn: His Life in Contemporary Pictures, which I've chosen because my PhD was in music iconography, looking at the portraiture of conductors. But of course, since Haydn, at the time, a composer, was also a player and a conductor and all of these things. So it has piqued my interest, and this was not the period I looked at. I was looking at the mid-19th or first quarter of the 19th century to the equivalent point in the 20th century. So this is, I'm by no means an expert, but it's always interesting looking at portraits of composers and conductors and players with a little bit of a period eye, and thinking, well, someone is choosing to seat the person that way, to dress them that way, to put those things on their desk, to put that in the background. And it's always interesting to just ask yourself, well, why is that? And in different periods, different things count as cultural capital. And at this point, it was still beneficial or a high status thing to be shown at your instrument. So he is often, these portraits, he is at a keyboard, or he's clearly holding a scroll of music wound up, so you can see there's an attribute of musician with him. But other than that, they're styled in the form of 17th, 18th century military heroes or royalty, aristocracy, so that's greater capital. Or he'll be at the piano, but his hands will be in this sort of etiquette pose rather than anything you would ever play the keyboard with, which is very common for pianists even right up into the middle of the 19th century. And it's a beautifully produced book. Everything's black and white, but it does have really good, meaty writing about the images. I'm not sure how much an iconographic analysis goes into it, but or whether it's just using them as historic starting points to discuss. But I always like looking at images of musicians and how they choose to be portrayed, or how their portraitist chose to portray them. Even in caricatures and things, you learn so much about what was considered high status about their job. And there were points in the 20th century, even now actually, where you'll have pictures of performers or composers without any reference to music around them whatsoever. That's not what's high status anymore. It'll be the fact that they're wearing nice clothes, or they're slim, or they're obviously standing somewhere really cool by a wall with graffiti on it, even though clearly they're a concert pianist and don't do graffiti. But when you read it with a little more depth, it's a fascinating way of showing, well, how do I make myself more high status than I probably already am, which is the whole point of portraiture for most people. So that's the last one I chose.
There's lots of these have been redone, haven't there? There's lots of these double-page spreads with ones that are,
You get an older version.
It's an older version and a newer version. It's quite interesting to see.
It's quite common in portraiture, and even things being added into them. So something might have started as a really simple lithograph, and then 4 years later being redone with a different image in the background, or so a very simple lifelike portrait of Beethoven might then reappear with clouds and storm clouds and thunder and lightning in the background, because that better expresses his genius, or the muse.
Here, the orchestral, look, the orchestral play.